Good morning, everybody. My name is Ron J. Miller, and this session is called The Myth of Digital Influence. Some of you may know that I blog frequently on the subject of social media and digital influence. I've spent a lot of the last year reviewing technical research from universities and from think tanks about how influence works. I'd like to present at least the landscape of that research and suggest a few of my own opinions. Those of you who have read me know that I am someone who does not shirk from a strong opinion. We know that there is such a thing as digital influence. We have seen it, whether it's United Breaks Guitars or it's Cute Overload. We have seen digital influence. I like to think of digital influence as a form of pixie dust. We see it, we know it's there, we don't know where it comes from, and we know it's magical. So a friend of mine, Joe Paluzzi at the Content Marketing Institute, says, people ask, what inning are we in? And if it's a baseball game, what inning are we in? And he says, we are just stepping out of the dugout. And I think that's a very apt metaphor for where we are. I want to talk about the prevailing theory of how digital influence works and why it's ultimately flawed and how we ought to be thinking about it instead. There's three big problems with the research that's gone on into digital influence. The first problem is we measure what we can, not what's important. Okay, there's an old joke. I'll try and tell it quickly, but basically there's a guy wandering around Times Square at midnight, and he's going around like this. And a cop comes up and says, what's the matter, mister? Did you lose something? And he said, yes, I lost my wallet coming out of the Astor Theater. And the cop says, well, the Astor Theater is 6 blocks that way. And the guy says, yeah, but the light's better here. That's kind of the way we go at market research. I can tell you how many people visit my site. I can't tell you if it's important or not. The second problem, and this is a theme that will run through this, is the difference between correlation and causality. We can find a lot of correlations easily. What we can't see is causality. I like to think that if Martians landed at Berkeley Buick out here on 494 and watched for a couple of days, they would think that this was a free car exchange. People drive up with their old cars, they come out, they look at one, somebody hands them the keys, and they drive away. They don't see what goes on inside the car dealership, as ugly as that is. You will be. I'm getting you ready for lunch. The third big problem with most of the conventional research that's being done on digital influence is that it's based on big events. As I like to say, this is sort of like trying to understand tectonic plate theory by studying volcanoes. You can learn a lot by studying volcanoes, but you fundamentally miss out on many of the basic principles by studying big events. Which leads me to what I consider to be the prevailing theory of digital influence, which is what I call the big influencer theory. And it's a preoccupation of marketing people because we have been deprived of the cheapest, best way to reach audiences, which was broadcast media. Broadcast media has been destroyed, so now when we think about social communications and digital communications, what we are looking for is what we used to have in the old day, which we now call scale. We want scale. And the notion is that back in 1944, there was a big marketing research study that came up with the notion of what's called two-step opinion influence. And it posited that there are opinion leaders in society. I'm an opinion leader. You don't care about the election. I study the election. You value my opinion. I am the opinion leader for you. And we've taken that model and we've stuck it on top of social media. And we now say Chris Brogan is a big influencer. Ellen DeGeneres is a big influencer. Justin Bieber is a big influencer. And I think the further and further you go into the structure of the problem of influence, the more you understand and respect just how absurd the big influencer theory is. Bernardo Huberman, we'll come back later on in the presentation, but Bernardo Huberman runs Hewlett-Packard's Social Computing Lab, and he said, look, businesses have a finite amount of money and time, therefore they have to identify the most connected people. In social networks, brands can connect with everyday people who are the celebrities of their networks. By the way, I am a celebrity of my own network. Thank you. The value to business is that they can have access, I love this metaphor, to the respective Rolodexes. Anybody here still have a Rolodex? But anyway, the metaphorical, like 20 years from now, nobody's going to understand what this means because Rolodex will have disappeared from the lexicon. But you'll be able to access really important people's Rolodexes. And from there, leverage them to actually influence digital conversations. Now, we're going to need to talk pretty quickly about digital conversations and the why behind them. If we want to influence, if we want to measure digital influence, there must be a reason. And I'll get into the complication that having a motivation to do something with digital influence invariably screws up how you look at digital influence. This month, Jon Steinberg and Jack Krawczyk. Jon Steinberg runs BuzzFeed and Jack Krawczyk runs Stumbled Upon. I'd like you to read this paragraph. There is little data to support the so-called influencer behavior in social marketing. Rather, the data suggests that content and ideas online spread through large numbers of people sharing with small groups. In other words, the whole big influencer idea is nonsense. It's not nonsense, but there is certainly at least a substantial amount of research that suggests that the actual behavior of sharing online is very different than the big influencer theory. And that small networks are really the key to understanding how digital influence works. There were a couple of other statistics that that they came up with in their research. They discovered that when people share content on Facebook, there's a 9-to-1 relationship. So in other words, the average piece of content is shared with 9 people. On Twitter, it's even less. It's 5-to-1. They looked at 5.5 million shares over 45 days. And for every outbound share to a social media network, there were 2 shares via personal connection like email using BuzzFeed or Stumbled Upon. So this kind of sharing that I do with you is what actually drives digital influence to the extent that it actually exists. There's a study that was done by Yahoo, I think it was about 18 months ago, that said 50% of all the tweets, there's 1 billion tweets a day, 50% of all the tweets come from 25,000 people. And that got everybody thinking, wow, I mean, those are big influencers. But what they found when they dug into it was, and it makes perfect sense, I mean, Ellen DeGeneres has 2 million followers. Every time she tweets, that's 2 million tweets. I follow Ellen DeGeneres. I don't see 98% of what she tweets, but she's one of the people I follow. She follows me. I follow her. I thought it was a friendly thing to do. You know, it doesn't have meaning. And this is, again, the difference between correlation and causality. We can see that there are 25,000 people who are responsible for half the crap on Twitter, okay? But it's like this, and it has no real meaning, which gets us back to why are we measuring things that are happening online? This may be a little bit hard to follow. I'll explain it pretty quickly. But there was a study done by our friend Bernardo Huberman at Hewlett-Packard, the guy that was promoting the big influencer theory. This is a study that was done 2 years ago by the same lab that proves precisely the opposite. What they did was they looked at the number of Twitter followers. They looked at people who had ranked very high in numbers of followers, and then they figured out ways of calculating how influential they were in getting their messages passed along and repassed along. What you see on the upper chart is people you would expect: Martha Stewart, NPR Politics, David Gregory, high number of followers and almost no influence. Conversely, these are the ones who have almost no followers but have tremendous pass-along influence. And when you look at the top chart, those are people that you would expect. You see Martha Stewart, you see big media channels, you see sports channels, you see journalists, and then down below, you see retweet contests and twit draws and musicians and political cartoons. That's what we're actually passing along. By the way, the one congressional candidate here, Rob, he's no relation to me. This is the Democrat who ran against Joe White, who was the guy that stood up during the State of the Union address and yelled, "You lie." So I think a key point here is passion drives social communication and social influence. So let's take a look at how we measure digital influence. I'm going to talk about 3 different forms of measuring social influence and why we're measuring them this way. Everybody here familiar with Klout? Okay, all right. My Klout score is not 100, I'll tell you. Justin Bieber's score is 100, but my score doesn't exist because I've deleted my Klout profile. And for reasons I'm about to explain, I would urge all of you to go do exactly the same thing. Okay. Klout is a blunt instrument that measures something, but it's not social influence. Okay. Klout is based on the premise, first of all, the way Klout works is they go out and they scrape social media messages. And they look at them and they attribute them to you and to you and to you. And they look at you and they say, okay, your messages, how often did they get passed along? And how often, when they are passed along, do those people pass them along? What they are saying is a proxy for social influence is pass-along ability. Okay? Now, there's a bunch of problems with that, and really Klout's purpose is not to be a definitive scientific measure of digital influence. Their purpose is to have an IPO and make $300 million. Okay? They have a primitive business model, which I call an inverted public relations agency, where instead of going out and talking to influencers, they take influencers, as they're defined, and sell them to companies. Some friends of mine in Toronto, Virgin Airlines, had a Klout special where they found 500, they just started flying from Toronto to Los Angeles. So they hired Klout and they got 500 people free tickets and a weekend in Los Angeles. Okay? So 500, everybody had scores up in the 80s, okay? So they flew 500 people down to Los Angeles. Canadians, since they're Canadians, they had a great time. They came back up. I know a lot of Canadians. And the result was 2,500 blog mentions. Now, I figured it out. It cost Virgin about $100,000 to do that promotion. I'm assuming they only paid Klout $25,000. They're going to have to sell something on the order of 15,000 plane tickets to recapture that investment. Okay? So, as I say, Klout is something that measures something, but it's not real digital influence. Some of you may know I'm actually in a fairly public spitting match with the CEO of Klout, Joe Fernandez, over, this was one of the more prominent posts I wrote. And I just want you to know that that is the best headline I've ever written in my entire life. It's Bolshevik call to action. It's got an exclamation point. Okay? I got 13,000 reads on social media today. I got 5,000 reads on my blog. I got over 4,000 retweets on this. 72 comments. Okay? Now, I want to explain a phenomenon. This is not particularly about Klout, but I think it's an important point about digital influence. I publish at least once a week on social media today, and like anybody who publishes, I publish my post, and then an hour later I go back and I see how many people have seen it. And I go back 2 hours later and I see how many people have seen it. Okay, so like 2 hours after I post, there might be, let's say, 400 reads. 400 people have read the piece. There will be 350 retweets. And we've looked at this. People who blog at social media today, we talk about this, and it's like 95% of the people who first read that post retweeted it. Well, we dug into it, and we found what happens is people get the RSS feed from social media today, and anything that comes off of that, boom, they retweet it. Boom, they retweet it. They don't even read it. And the reason is they're trying to raise the quality of their Twitter feed so that more of you follow them, so that they look influential, and this is how the system gets gained. It breaks my heart to know that half of the retweets are little software bots that are just going, Ron, Ron, Ron. But that's the business that we're involved in. So this is, and there are other ones that if people are familiar with them, ProScore, Kred, all of them are trying to find some quick way of saying, this is how important somebody is on a scale of 1 to 100. Here's a couple of things that they're known for. And these, what I call simpler systems, do a better or worse job of actually measuring social influence. This is Klout's Theology, if you will. You're either participating or you're listening. You're consistent or you're casual. And apparently if you're consistent, you're creating. Or you're sharing and you're casual. Or you're listening and you're focused. Or my point is, if you look at the 16 words that are up there, how many of these really have anything to do with creating? Klout doesn't reward you for creating content. Klout rewards you for seeing content, passing it along, and having enough people say, wow, that's important, I'm going to pass that along too. And if I'm this spigot of links that are really important and credible, and you all pass them along, and other people pass them along, I'm very important in the Klout paradigm. And that can be so artificially gained and has nothing to do with actually creating content that I think it fundamentally makes the Klout paradigm illegitimate. I use other words when I'm writing about them. Okay, let's move up to the next level. The next level of measuring social influence are increasingly sophisticated software listening posts, listening software. Radian 6 currently is the market leader. They've been purchased by Salesforce. They are now integrated within Salesforce. And they accomplish what I consider to be the first and primary task of people who are actually interested and are professionals about social media, which is either as a client or as an agency to listen. You can learn a tremendous amount by just listening. Radian 6 tries to do two things. One, it quantitatively tries to measure ideas like sentiment, and it qualitatively tries to present both real-time flow as well as examples. The key thing about the Radian 6 paradigm and most of the second level of social listening is that it's based on keywords. And the challenge of keywords is that I'm required, if I'm General Mills, to define them. And I may, because of conventional wisdom and the screwy way my brain works, I may create a set of keywords over here when, in fact, the influence is over here. So in effect, you're reaching out into the darkness, and if you know which direction to reach in, you can actually measure sentiment. But as we've seen over and over again, especially in this rapidly evolving space, the opportunity for us to define, based on looking backwards at what we've done, what our key ideas are, and to say that's what our customers are thinking about, may or may not be accurate. So the use of this kind of software requires a constant tuning and experimentation. Increasingly, they're trying to get involved with semantic analysis, natural language processing. You'll see where is it? Somewhere up here they have a green flag. Oh, there it is. They have green flags, yellow flags, and red flags. And posts will come through, and they'll look at them for sentiment. Well, when I did my delete your Klout profile post, retweets would come by, and they would say, "I'm so angry about this. This is absolutely correct." And that was considered a negative response because it started off with, "I'm so angry." Okay, well, I'm so angry about them. I'm not angry about the writer, I'm angry about them. So again, that's one of the challenges of this primitive kind of NLP. These are the leaders. Yesterday, Symphony and Visible Technologies announced that they're merging. And I think it's important to see that there's a consolidation of very powerful companies supporting this. Radian6 is owned by Salesforce. Nielsen is the Nielsen ratings. Symphony and Visible are combining so that they have more bulk. Conversion is an interesting case because they have a tool set, but fundamentally they are a professional services firm, and they cost about 4x what the others do, but they also spend a lot more time experimenting and going through and trying to find out where real sentiment lies. This is what I would call the third tier of listening for social and digital influence. This is a company called Dachis Group. They're based in Austin, Texas. Jeff Dachis founded Razorfish, cashed out his $1 billion, and now he is on to the business of what he calls social business engineering. What they did was they went to 40% of the companies in the Fortune 500, and they said, "Give us your data. We will go scrape on a massive big data basis, 10x what Klout is doing. We will scrape all of the social messages we can. We will boil the ocean about your particular brand. And by marrying it to your data, plus getting third-party data like Experian data, First data, census data, we will marry this up in a massive data experiment to try and map out not just measuring influence, but attributing influence." And one of the first experiments they did was they were retained by British Petroleum because BP, after the oil spill, came out with 6 different crisis management strategies. They tried 6 different ways of convincing us that they really weren't evil just because they spilled billions of gallons of oil in the Gulf of Mexico, and in fact they were being responsible. And what Dachis did was they tracked all 6 of those and found which ones were working with whom, and in what region. And they helped them drop 4 of the programs, keeping one of them focused in the Southeast where people were, and the rest of it for a more national and international audience. Here's an example of a different kind of representation screen that Dachis uses. Here what they're trying to do is give a high-level view, a dashboard view of conversations that are going on for Ralph Lauren. And you see M represents people, consumers like you and me. You have messages coming out of partners, Macy's, people who sell Ralph Lauren. Influencers are those big influencer people. They measure those. And then they have internal conversations coming, or social media conversations coming out of the company itself through its official channels, and then employees. In this way, they're able to distinguish noise depending on what they're trying to measure. So those are ways, sort of the three tiers that we're measuring digital influence. Dana Boyd is, I think, a well-known researcher from Microsoft, and she makes the point here that what's happening here isn't just measurement. It's trying to leverage measurement to do something, and that's where it loses its role as a measurement process. We're not measuring social capital in the abstract as academics and reporting on it. We're measuring it because we're General Mills and we want to sell more breakfast food, or because we're General Motors and we want to sell more cars. Which brings us to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And for those of you who, like me, did not take quantum physics, Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle posits that you can tell the position of something, you can tell the direction of something, but you can't tell both. And in measuring it, you influence it. So this is the problem with, I think, the essence or a metaphor for digital influence measurement. We can tell the velocity of certain memes, and we can even occasionally find specific examples, but we can't map the entire landscape of attribution to prove causality. Here's David Armano is with Edelman. He's I think a well-known big thinker in this space, and he mapped out. He created this map, which I think does a pretty good job of beginning to lay out the complexity of the challenge of actually measuring how digital influence works. In any given communication, you have how far does it go? Is it important to me? Do I trust the person's expertise? Is it relevant to me? Does that person have credibility? Do I trust them personally? And all of that leads then to influence. But beyond that, there are a bunch of people who are influenced who don't commit to a behavior. And even of those who commit to a behavior, you don't necessarily get the outcome. So this is why you might get people to go into a Volvo dealership for a test drive, but you don't necessarily get them to buy, even if you can get them there. And I looked at this, and I mean, right on top of it, I could think of at least 4 more. There was a statistic that, depending on the number of followers you have, if you have an average number of followers, you don't see about 95% of the Twitter flow that goes by, because you have other things to do. I have other things to do. I don't go back and look at my Twitter feed all the way back to the morning. I kind of look at the last 5-10 minutes, see what's current. I look to see if my name has been mentioned. This is so time becomes important. The context that I'm receiving it, if I'm at the office, if I'm driving my car and trying to text, if I'm in a good mood, a bad mood, what the relationship is in the flow of my day, all of these things govern how well we receive a particular digital message. And it's all his fault. The big influencer theory, I believe, is Malcolm Gladwell's fault. Those of you who don't know Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote a book called The Tipping Point. And the tipping point has now reached the tipping point of being, I would say, the dominant marketing ideology that we use when we think about marketing challenges. And Gladwell said in the real world we have connectors who help connect people together. We have mavens who are experts on things. And then we have salesmen who use knowledge to engage and persuade people. And since we understood this paradigm, when social media and digital communications began to develop currency and develop a critical mass, we said, well, of course, that works exactly this way, right? And this is where I think the big influencer theory began and where it began to get currency. And as with almost anything, you can develop research that will support this point, but the current academic research suggests otherwise. Brian Solis, if you are at all interested in the subject, Brian Solis of the Altimeter Group this month came out with a presentation called The Rise of Digital Influence. as opposed to the myth of digital influence. And as you see, he kind of organized what Armano had into these three big paradigms: reach, relevance, resonance. And this is where I want to come to the tipping point of this presentation. I think what we're doing is we're doing what we will always do when we're challenged emotionally. We'll try to find a logical solution that we feel emotionally comfortable with. We like tools. We like platforms. It's great to think that Klout actually works because it's a solution. This is a hugely challenging problem, and to sit here and say, well, we just live in a period of ambiguity and we're just beginning, it doesn't make people feel good. I believe that digital influence works primarily because of that center column, resonance. Okay? You can figure out all kinds of systems and mechanics, and you can go into software, you can go into community managers, and you can build up authority and affinity and trust and reach and frequency and all of these kind of 20th century ideas, but resonance is really the thing that works. And I think another word for resonance is greatness. You know, United Breaks Guitars got, 23 million views on YouTube because every one of us has been treated like a cow by an airline, often. So when we saw this, and we saw this guy making fun of United Airlines, we had tremendous empathy for him. The qualities that create resonance, this is just my list, but in looking around, these are the ones that keep coming up over and over again. Is it funny? Are we empathetic? If I see cute overload in my household one more time, I'm going to break the computer. Is it the start of a trend? Does it have social significance? 2008, Barack Obama, there was a lot of influence digitally about the Obama campaign because of its social significance. Does it affirm who I am? Sex always sells. Does it have novelty? Does it capture the zeitgeist? And I think that's where my Klout post got a lot of currency, because there were a lot of people that kind of felt, and they, hey, that guy's right. I hate Klout. I hate them. I'm going to retweet that. A friend of mine said the irony is that if I actually still had a Klout score, it would probably be up in the 80s, but that's for another day. So this is the kind of thing that has resonance with us. Isn't this brilliant? I mean, who among us hasn't held that slobbery tennis ball and the dog? You know, this has gotten 7 million views on YouTube. Okay, now why has it gotten? Look at that. This is great. Oh, yeah, there we go. This dog is in heaven. So think of all the qualities I listed on the previous page. I mean, empathy, humor, novelty. It's there. Okay? No. Isn't it great they have a fail-safe mechanism if the ball isn't? I mean, this guy really thought. This guy clearly is like, you know, works at Google. So the point I want to draw from Jerry is it gives us a lot to think and discuss. I think we're focusing on the wrong end of the problem. We will advance in our measurement, our capability of understanding sentiment, natural language processing. All of these will move on, and we will take the second step out of the dugout up to the plate, or whatever the metaphor is. But I think what we need to focus on is the message. And if we spend more time thinking about the user experience, about the creativity, the ingenuity, coming up with new ideas, that's where we are going to find real digital influence. You can find influence by having me tweet things if you pay me, but I don't think that's really going to be a sustainable business model. So here are a few things I'd like to open up and discuss for a few moments. How do we measure digital social influence and why? How can we affect it? How do we coordinate between offline and online? And I think most importantly, how can we create, those of us who are professionals in this field, how can we create resonant brand communications? There's a friend of mine who works over at General Mills named Jim Keene, and we were talking about viral videos. And he said the problem with viral video is that it is a Hail Mary. You have no idea if it's going to get caught. You have no idea if it's going to go viral in Japan, where you're not even selling. But that's the Wild West landscape that we are moving into. And I think as marketers and as business people, as technologists, as we try to bring our ingenuity together, I think it should be less on trying to figure out how to get our damn tweet retweeted, and it ought to be more on how we create a resonant message. So, I'm Ron J. Miller. I'm influential about Malcolm Gladwell, the Zeitgeist, and lunch, which is what we're going to have right now. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.